James, tell us, what's going to happen to these former soldiers?
Well, for now it's unclear. Clearly, HTS Tahrir al-Sham is trying to put down some rules. Indeed, they are caught between the fact that they do not want to alienate completely all these civil servants who live in these apartments, and on the other hand, well, they are looking for flats to house the fighters that indeed took Damascus from Tahrir al-Sham and also from other components of this coalition that indeed ousted Bashar al-Assad. Now, when it comes to these people who are in these flats, what happens is that they had a package from the government to civil servants. So they had free housing, they had a certain amount of advantages and a very small salary. Around $30 to $50 a month is how much these people were making. And of course, that means that, well, they had decent living conditions, but no money aside, or not really means to rent flats or buy a house. So those who had enough money or houses on the coast have fled these areas, but for the others, of course, it's very complicated. And what we see in that report is that indeed these people are there for now, but they're under considerable pressure to move, and HTS is having a tough job controlling all of that.
And it's not just members of Assad's Republican Guard, but I imagine a whole civil and state apparatus around the country that's now being uprooted.
Absolutely. Well, after 12 years of civil war, a lot of violence, and obviously there is a lot of hatred here for those who collaborated with the regime when it comes to the opposite camp. Well, right now, what I can tell you is that, for example, the 1.2 million civil servants that formed the security apparatus in the country, that's police, that's the army, that is all the support functions of these institutions, that's 1.2 million people who are basically being kicked out of their jobs and are not being paid, and that's been going on now for over a month. So of course that is posing a certain amount of problems. If you're talking about the finance ministry, for example, it's 300,000 civil servants that are in the same situation. We spoke to a journalist from the national television. She told us that basically the journalists had been put on forced leave, unpaid forced leave for 3 months, pending decisions as to what their future might be. That gives you an idea of what's happening here. It really is a cleaning up of the people who were close to the former regime. Now, HTS is saying that they will reintegrate some of these civil servants, those who, I quote, have no blood on their hands, or you can understand that would be those who were not too close to the regime, but obviously that is a very, very difficult thing to do, but it does need to happen because it is a very large mass of people right now who have no money in a country that is in a very, very deep economic crisis because of over 10 years of sanctions, and of course who are growing angry. There are protests across the country about these issues as we speak.
In terms of who's actually taking charge of this transition, you mentioned earlier there being other factions operating aside from HTS. Does it have full control of the situation?
Well, it appears that it is very complicated for HTS to control all these other organizations that took part in the ousting of Bashar al-Assad. As you know, it is a large coalition of Islamist rebel movements that's moved on to Damascus. And what happened was the country, the regime actually fell very rapidly. So they found themselves in charge of Damascus after a very short period of time. And what we are seeing now, and it's a good illustration of that in that report, this is what we saw, is that yes, HTS has its guidelines, has its rules, is trying to rebuild the country, but on the other hand, you have other factions who are basically operating on their own and who are claiming very often to be part of HTS. And just to give you an example of what we're seeing in those barracks is happening all over the city. For example, a Syrian journalist we were speaking to was telling us that her office basically people were trying to take her office from her. They'd call her saying, right, your office used to belong to an army general, so you need to move out and we want it back unless you can prove otherwise. Well, she said, well, you know, for me, that office was rented to a doctor living in Lebanon, so I have full rights on it. But the fact of the matter is, this is happening everywhere. We also met an old man whose garage had been stolen by his neighbor. So HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and the new power really needs to take control of the situation, to impose discipline, and indeed to sort things out, or else it's going to be very difficult to keep control over the country.